1902, Serbia. The twins who spoke in a language no one taught them. The Vranje Linguistic File. The year was 1902. Vranje, a quiet Serbian town, slept under a restless sky. Thunder rolled across the Balkan hills, and the rain struck rooftops like 1,000 tiny drums. Inside a small wooden house, two cries broke through the storm. Twin boys had entered the world. Their arrival felt different. Neighbors recalled later that the candles flickered oddly that night. Animals grew restless. Dogs howled without reason. It was as if the air itself trembled. The mother, pale and exhausted, whispered that she had dreamt of these children before. She saw them speaking to each other in voices not human. No one believed her. Not yet. The twins grew quickly. From their first months, something unsettled everyone around them. They rarely cried like normal infants. Instead, they made sharp, rhythmic sounds, tones that rose and fell with strange precision, as if following rules no one could understand. By the time they were a year old, they babbled constantly. But it wasn't babbling in the usual sense. It was consistent. Patterns repeated. Certain combinations appeared only in certain situations. They weren't just making noise. They were communicating. Parents usually smile at baby talk, but these parents grew pale. The twins weren't learning Serbian. They weren't even attempting it. Instead, they spoke to each other, and only each other, in a language no one had taught them. Whisper spread. Villagers claimed the children were cursed. Some muttered about witchcraft. Others remembered old Balkan legends of spirits that entered newborns, twisting them away from the world of men. One night, an old woman who lived nearby swore she heard the boys laughing in the dark. Not the giggles of infants, but laughter, cold, shared, as though they understood something no one else could. The mother stopped leaving the house at night. The father worked long hours, but never spoke of his sons in the tavern. Silence wrapped around the family. Silence and shame. Yet behind closed doors the twins thrived. They built their own world. They spoke endlessly, their voices weaving through the wooden rooms like a chant. Sometimes they grew so loud the parents begged them to stop. Other times, they whispered together so softly that even when the father pressed his ear to the wall, he could hear nothing but faint breaths. At 2 years old, something even stranger appeared. When given scraps of paper, the boys began scratching lines and shapes. At first, it seemed like scribbles, but patterns returned again and again. Circles combined with slashes, triangles with dots. It wasn't random. It was writing. The father burned the first pages in the stove, but the boys simply made more. By now, the family lived in fear of discovery, but discovery was inevitable. One morning, the parish priest came to bless the house after the mother fell ill. As he sprinkled holy water in the corner room, he froze. The twins sat on the floor, muttering back and forth in their strange tongue. Their eyes never left his. The priest dropped the vial of water. He fled without finishing the prayer. By nightfall, half the town knew. The children who spoke a secret language were no longer a hidden shame. They were a public mystery, and mysteries, in Serbia of 1902, rarely stayed harmless. The villagers began asking questions. Some wanted to help, others wanted to punish. But all agreed, whatever these boys were, they were not ordinary children. The storm of their birth had not ended. It had only begun. The sound of their speech was unlike anything anyone in Vranje had heard before. Not Serbian, not Romani, not Turkish, not even the scattered dialects from across the Balkans. It carried a rhythm, measured, deliberate, almost musical. Neighbors described it as a song without melody. The boys spoke it fluently, switching back and forth as if bound by invisible rules. When spoken to in Serbian, they stared blankly. When pressed, they whispered to each other, then burst out laughing, as though the world outside their bond meant nothing. By age 3, they were inseparable. They played in silence around others, but when left alone, their voices filled the house. The language had texture. Hard consonants struck like hammers, followed by long, flowing vowels that seemed to bend and coil. The mother once recorded a string of words she overheard. Taru Mina, Volisan, Taru Mina. It was repeated several times, always with the same inflection. No villager could decipher it. No priest could trace its origin. No traveler recognized the tongue. The conclusion spread. The twins were inventing it. But how could toddlers invent a language so consistent, so complex, and so unyielding to outside influence? Fear turned into fascination. Children were warned to stay away, yet they lingered outside the twins' home to listen. Some swore they could hear entire conversations through the wooden walls, one twin questioning, the other answering, like adults debating. The local doctor examined them, convinced it was a case of cryptophagia, the secret language some twins invent. Yet even he admitted something was wrong. Normal twin speech faded with age. But this was growing stronger. At 4 years old, they began to refuse food unless it was asked for in their own language. Bread, milk, fruit, they demanded it through strange syllables. When their mother tried to teach them Serbian words, they grew angry, even violent, rejecting the outside world with cries that rattled her bones. One night, the father awoke to whispers. The twins were lying in bed, eyes wide open, whispering in perfect synchrony. Not call and response, not back and forth, but together in one voice like a chant. The sound shook him. He crossed himself and left the room, refusing to step back inside until morning. Rumors spread that they were speaking to more than each other, that some unseen force lingered in the dark, listening, answering. When they turned 5, the language began appearing in another form, symbols. The boys scratched markings into wooden furniture, into the dirt outside, even into the walls of their home. Always the same shapes, always the same patterns. Circles intersected with triangles. Eros bent Beckford. Symbols repeated like an alphabet no one could read. The mother begged the priest for help, but he refused to return to the house. "This is not of God," he said, "and I will not step inside." The town grew restless. Some whispered that the boys carried a demon. Others claimed they were blessed with knowledge from a forgotten people. But what unsettled the villagers most was not the language itself. It was the certainty with which the twins spoke it. They never stumbled, never hesitated, never invented new words clumsily as children do. Every syllable seemed polished, as though they were remembering, not creating. And that raised the most terrifying question of all. If the twins had not invented this language, then where had it come from? It began with whispers. Then the whispers became stories. And soon, stories turned into fear. By 1906, the people of Vranje no longer spoke of the twins as children. They called them the cursed mouths. Mothers clutched their infants when the boys walked past. Old men crossed themselves at the sound of their strange words. The village had seen war, famine, and plague. But nothing like this. Not two children who spoke in a tongue no one could teach or break. At first, fear spread slowly, hidden in tavern corners and church pews. But one evening changed everything. The twins were playing outside, drawing their symbols in the dirt. A group of other children approached, curious. One boy, braver than the rest, pointed at the markings and asked what they meant. The twins looked at each other, then began to laugh. Their laughter was sharp, high, and unrelenting. They pointed at the boy, spoke a string of words in their secret tongue, and clapped their hands in unison. The boy froze. His face drained of color. He ran home crying, screaming that the twins had cursed him. That night, he developed a fever. By morning, he was delirious. The villagers needed no further proof. The language was not just strange, it was dangerous. Panic took hold. Neighbors stopped visiting the family. The father's work offers disappeared. The mother received no help with food or chores. The family became an island in the center of town, cut off, isolated, despised. The priest preached on Sunday about the dangers of unnatural tongues and the devil's power to corrupt the innocent. Though he never named the twins directly, everyone knew who he meant. Even the animals grew uneasy. Horses shied away when the twins approached. Dogs howled and barked when they walked past. Some swore that chickens stopped laying eggs near their home. The breaking point came during Easter of 1907. The family attended Mass for the first time in months. As the choirs sang, The twins whispered back and forth in their secret tongue. The sound grew louder and louder until it echoed through the church. The priest slammed his hand against the altar and shouted, "Silence!" The entire congregation turned to see two small boys, smiling faintly, as though amused by the command. They did not stop. Their voices grew louder, drowning out the choir, filling the church with strange syllables no one could understand. The air grew heavy. Candles flickered. Some swore the ground trembled. Terrified, the priest declared the boys possessed. Families fled the building. The parents dragged the twins home as stones rained against their windows. That night, the bells of Vranje tolled not for celebration, but for warning. From that moment, the twins were no longer just outcasts. They were a threat. Villagers demanded action. Some wanted the church to intervene with exorcism. Others whispered of older, darker remedies that had nothing to do with prayer. The father pleaded with officials to protect his family, but officials, too, began to doubt. They asked, if the children were simply strange, why did their language spread such dread? Why did sickness and accidents follow them? The truth was simple. The town had decided. The twins were not children anymore. They were something else, something the village could not and would not accept. Fear had turned to panic, and panic was turning to rage. The walls of the house became a prison, not for the twins, but for their parents. By 1908, the family lived in constant dread. Neighbors refused to sell them bread. Children threw stones at their windows. At night, voices outside hissed curses, promising that one day the cursed mouths would be silenced. The father tried to stand tall in public, but inside, fear hollowed him. He had once dreamed of raising strong sons, men who would work the land. Now, he avoided even looking into their eyes. The mother carried her terror differently. She moved through the house like a ghost, whispering prayers under her breath. When the twins spoke, she often pressed her hands over her ears, trembling. But what haunted them most was not the village. It was the sound of the language itself. The twins no longer used it just for play. They argued in it, reasoned in it, comforted each other with it. To hear them was to hear a world the parents could never enter. One evening, the father tried to break it. He sat them down and demanded, "Speak Serbian, just one word." The boys looked at him silently, then turned to each other and muttered in their strange tongue. Their tone was mocking, dismissive, like judges denying his request. The father slammed his fist against the table. The boys did not flinch. They only smiled. The mother began to fear they weren't hers at all. She confessed to a cousin that when she looked at them, she felt no bond, only distance, as though they belonged to someone else, someone unseen. At night, she dreamed of them whispering in the dark, their mouths moving without sound, their eyes glowing faintly like embers. She woke drenched in sweat, convinced the dreams were not dreams at all. The family lived in silence, but the silence was breaking them. The father drank more each day, staring at the fire until it died to ash. The mother avoided the twins, sometimes leaving them alone for hours, pretending to fetch water or visit a neighbor who no longer welcomed her. Inside the house, the boys grew wilder. They carved their symbols into furniture, floors, even the walls. They laughed when their mother tried to scrub them clean. The home no longer looked like a home. It looked like a shrine to something no one could name. By 1909, the father was ready to send them away. He whispered it to his wife in the dead of night. Perhaps to an orphanage, perhaps to the church. Anywhere but here. The mother sobbed, but said nothing. She knew he was right, but she also knew the truth. No one would take them. The villagers would never allow it. The church would never claim them. And even if they were abandoned, the boys would still return. They always returned to each other. The parents' terror became their own secret language. A silence filled with guilt, with dread, with the slow erosion of hope. And beneath it all lingered the darkest fear of all. What if the priest was right? What if the boys were not children to be raised, but vessels of something the world was never meant to hear? The parents did not know it then, but their silence would soon be broken. Outsiders had heard of the twins, and they were coming. By 1910, word of the strange twins had traveled far beyond Vranje. Stories of children speaking in an unknown tongue reached Belgrade, then crossed borders into Austria-Hungary. Scholars, priests, and doctors argued in letters and journals. Were these simply delusional peasants, or had something extraordinary been discovered in the Balkans? Soon, men with notebooks and wire-rimmed glasses began appearing in the village. Some carried dictionaries. Others carried crosses. All carried questions. The villagers welcomed them with eager hands. Finally, outsiders would confirm what they already feared. The twins were not of this world. The first to enter the home was Dr. Markovic, a linguist from Belgrade University. He expected simple babbling. Instead, he encountered fluency. The twins sat on the floor, whispering to each other, then burst into laughter. When the doctor interrupted with Serbian words, they ignored him. When he tried German, they stared coldly. But when he repeated one of their phrases back to them, clumsy, broken, they froze. For the first time, they looked at an outsider with recognition. Then they both erupted in a torrent of words, so fast and sharp the doctor's pencil could not keep up. He left the house pale, muttering, "It is not invention. It is structure. Grammar. A language complete." Weeks later, more arrived. A team of 3 scholars set up camp in the village inn. They recorded the boys' sounds phonetically, marking strange consonants no Slavic tongue possessed. They begged the parents to allow the twins to be taken to Belgrade for further study. The father refused. Not out of love, but fear. He whispered to his wife, "What if they speak more freely away from us? What if their words reveal something the world should never hear?" The scholars argued, bribed, even threatened. But the boys remained in Vranje. Still, the investigation deepened. Doctors examined the twins' hearing and speech organs. They found no defects. Priests demanded exorcisms, but the parents refused, terrified of what an exorcism might unleash. The scholars published short articles in foreign journals, hinting at a case of spontaneous linguistic creation and possible evidence of lost Balkan tongues. But the details were vague, inconsistent, almost hesitant, as though even the educated men feared putting into words what they had heard. Meanwhile, the villagers grew restless. The more outsiders came, the more the twins were seen not as children, but as subjects, experiments, objects of curiosity. Children whispered that the twins had begun inventing new words, words that sounded harsher, older, as though pulled from the earth itself. Farmers swore they saw the boys scratching their symbols not only into walls, but into tree bark, fences, even stones. The language was growing, spreading, refusing to die. One evening, a scholar from Vienna stayed late in the family's home. He asked the boys to repeat certain words over and over, writing feverishly. Suddenly, the twins fell silent. They stared at him with unblinking eyes. Then, in unison, they spoke a long string of words, slow, deliberate, like a command. The scholar's hand froze. His pencil dropped. He left without another word. By dawn, he was gone from the village, never to return. The parents felt no relief. For if even the learned men of Europe fled from their sons, what chance did they, the mother and father, have? The scholars had come searching for answers. Instead, they left behind only more questions. And soon, the questions would take shape not only in spoken words, but in symbols no one could deny. It began with scratches. At first, no one cared. Children often doodled on wood or dirt. But the twins' marks carried order. They were not play. They were patterns. The shapes appeared everywhere. Circles sliced with vertical lines. Arrows bent inwards. Clusters of dots linked by triangles. The twins drew them on the floorboards, on scraps of paper, even on the walls of the church when their parents weren't watching. The father scrubbed them clean with lye and water. By morning, the symbols were back, drawn again in perfect form, as if the boys had memorized every line. By age 9, their room looked less like a child's bedroom and more like a crypt. Walls, bedposts, furniture, every surface bore the marks. Some arranged neatly in rows, others spiraled outward like wheels. The mother once tried to stop them, snatching a piece of charcoal from their hands. The boys screamed in unison, shrill and piercing, until she dropped it. Then, together, they calmly continued their work, as though nothing had happened. The villagers began whispering that it was not writing at all, but summoning. One autumn evening, a traveling teacher visited the home, curious about the case. He asked the boys to draw their letters for him. They did, quickly, eagerly, filling entire sheets with markings. The teacher studied them under lamplight. He frowned, then grew pale. He swore that many of the symbols resembled ancient Balkan runes, scripts long dead, spoken of only in fragments. Yet the twins had never seen books, never met scholars, never left the village. Impossible, he muttered. Children cannot invent this. He left trembling, refusing to touch the pages again. But the symbols continued. The family's neighbors noticed patterns forming outside the house. Stones arranged in circles, marks carved in a tree bark, paths traced in the soil like labyrinths leading nowhere. At night, villagers claimed they saw the twins moving silently in the moonlight, scratching symbols into the earth. Their pale faces lit only by the glow of the moon, their voices whispering words too soft to understand. When the father confronted them, demanding to know why they drew these things, the boys only answered in their language. Slow, patient, as if explaining to him something far beyond his grasp. He struck the table in frustration. The symbols didn't stop. By 1911, the villagers had seen enough. They declared the markings the devil's script. Some wanted to burn the house. Others insisted the boys be delivered to the church at once. The parents resisted, but resistance was weakening, for even they had begun to fear the drawings. The mother swore one night she saw the symbols move, shifting ever so slightly across the wall, as if alive. She covered her eyes, praying, but when she opened them again, the marks were still. The boys' language had escaped their mouths and entered the world around them, and once it had taken shape, it could not be erased. The villagers demanded judgment. The church prepared to intervene. The twins, for the first time, would face a verdict not from family or scholars, but from God's house itself. The church bells tolled heavy that winter, not for celebration, not for mourning, but for judgment. By 1912, the whispers and fear had reached a breaking point. The parish priest, pressured by his flock, summoned the family to stand before the church council. The twins, barely 10 years old, were to be examined not as children, but as instruments of something unholy. The family entered the stone church with trembling steps. The villagers packed the pews, eyes burning with suspicion. The twins walked side by side, unafraid, their bare feet echoing against the cold floor. Candles flickered in their presence. Some swore the flames bent toward them, as if pulled by an unseen breath. The priest raised his hand and demanded silence. He asked the boys to speak. They obeyed, but not in Serbian. They spoke their language, fluid and confident, their voices weaving into a rhythm that filled the chamber. The congregation gasped. Women clutched their rosaries. Men clenched their fists. The priest shouted a prayer of exorcism, his voice trembling with fury. But the boys did not falter. Their words grew louder, overlapping, until their voices seemed to echo from every corner of the church. The sound was unbearable. Some villagers covered their ears. Others swore they heard familiar names hidden in the strange speech, names of the dead, names that had not been spoken in years. Finally, the priest slammed his Bible shut. These are not words of men, he declared, his face pale with fear. This is not a tongue of God. It is corruption. It is shadow. It is the speech of demons. The verdict was clear. The twins were condemned, not to death, but to separation, study, and purification under the church's watch. The villagers cheered in grim relief, but the parents wept silently, for they knew what separation meant. That night, the family returned home under guard. The priest warned them. If they resisted, the children would be taken by force. The mother collapsed by the hearth, begging God for mercy. The father stared at the boys, who sat calmly side by side, whispering to each other as though the church's verdict was nothing more than wind. Their calmness was worse than rebellion. It was as though they had expected this all along. In the days that followed, preparations began. Officials spoke of taking one boy to a monastery in the mountains, the other to a convent across the border. The hope was simple: apart, their language of demons would die. But nothing about the twins had ever been simple. The villagers believed the church had delivered salvation. But the truth was darker. For the moment men tried to divide the brothers, the mystery would only grow deeper and far more dangerous. The verdict had been spoken. Now came the test. The decision was final. The twins would be torn apart. In the spring of 1913, under gray skies and the weight of a restless village, church officials arrived at the family's door. 2 carriages stood waiting, one bound for a monastery in the mountains, the other for a convent far to the south. The mother collapsed in the doorway, clutching her sons, begging them not to be taken. The father stood frozen, powerless. He had fought the village for years, but against the church he had no weapons left. The twins did not cry. They did not scream. They only looked at each other. Then, in their strange language, they began to chant, low, steady, as though preparing themselves for what was to come. The villagers gathered to watch. When the boys were pulled apart, the sound that erupted chilled every soul present. Not a scream, not a cry, but a tearing wail of syllables, an outpouring of their language, shouted at impossible speed, as though they were trying to finish a conversation before it was too late. One was forced into one carriage, the other into another. Their voices echoed down the dirt road as the wheels creaked forward, their words stretching into the distance until they vanished into silence. For the first time in their lives, the twins were alone. At the monastery, the first boy sat in silence. Monks attempted to teach him scripture, prayers, and Serbian words. He did not respond. Days passed. Weeks. He refused food unless it was placed before him with no words attached. At the convent, the second boy behaved the same. The nuns tried kindness, then punishment. Nothing worked. He remained mute, staring through walls, as though waiting for something beyond them. Both boys had stopped speaking. Not Serbian, not their own tongue, nothing. It was as if their language could not exist without the other. Months passed. The monks reported strange happenings. The boy waking in the middle of the night, whispering words in his sleep, his eyes wide open. The nuns wrote similar letters, their boy pacing the halls, hands scratching invisible symbols into the air, as though carving his language onto nothing. Even separated by mountains, they behaved as one. The church grew uneasy. What was meant to cure them only deepened the mystery. Priests began whispering that perhaps the twins' bond was not of flesh and blood, but of spirit. That separation in body meant nothing if their souls remained bound. Then came the night of the thunderstorm. In the monastery, monks claimed they heard the boy scream, not in fear, but in words. A torrent of his strange language shouted into the darkness, as though he were speaking across the world. At the convent, the nuns swore their boy rose from bed at the exact same hour, crying out in the same tongue, repeating the same phrases. Neither could have heard the other. Yet their words matched, syllable for syllable. The experiment was a failure. Worse, it had proven something terrifying. Distance could not break their language. Separation could not sever their bond. And the church, faced with what it could not explain, quietly began retreating from the case. But silence would not last. For when records began to vanish, when evidence began to disappear, the truth of the twins' story would slip further into shadow, until even their existence would be questioned. History bends easiest where fear leaves its mark. And in Vranje, the story of the twins began to dissolve. Not by accident, but by design. By 1914, the Balkans were shifting toward war. Armies mobilized, borders cracked, and the great powers cast their shadows over Serbia. In the noise of mobilization, strange stories were inconvenient things. The church, once eager to prove its authority over the twins, now grew silent. Reports written by monks and nuns vanished from archives. Letters scholars had sent to Vienna were returned unanswered. Local officials who had once sworn the case was real now shook their heads and said, "There are no such records." The file began to disappear. The family, too, faded from mention. The father drowned in despair, his health failing. The mother, worn thin, spoke little of her sons. When pressed, she claimed they were with God now. Whether that meant alive in the monasteries or buried in unmarked graves, no one dared to ask. Yet whispers remained. Villagers recalled seeing strange symbols carved into stones near the forests. Soldiers claimed that before they marched to war, the twins were seen together again, thin, pale, muttering in their tongue as if they had never been apart. No one could prove it, and that was the point. Scholars who had once visited Vranje returned to their universities to find their notes missing. Some swore their journals had been stolen. Others claimed their papers had been altered. One linguist, a German, even suggested that someone in authority was deliberately erasing the case. But why? Some believed the church feared what the twins represented, a language that could not be tied to scripture or history, a bond stronger than holy sacraments. Others whispered that the government itself intervened, fearing foreign powers might seize the children as objects of study, perhaps even weapons. And then there was a darker possibility, that the twins themselves had a hand in the vanishing, that they, or whatever spoke through them, did not wish their story to be written. The war years devoured what little evidence remained. Archives burned, village hantés, the Balkans drowned in fire and blood. By 1918, when silence finally fell across the land, the Vranje Linguistic File was nothing more than rumor. Journalists dismissed it as peasant superstition. Priests called it a misunderstanding. Scholars, if they remembered it all, refused to speak. But still, in taverns, in mountain huts, in whispered prayers at night, the tale survived. The children who spoke a tongue, not a man. The boys who could not be separated. Decades later, fragments surfaced. A page in an old archive with symbols no one could translate. A letter describing a night when two voices spoke in unison across mountains. A testimony from a soldier who claimed to have seen them again during the war, unchanged, unaged, their language rolling like thunder. But always, just as quickly as evidence appeared, it was lost again. Documents misplaced. Pages torn. Files sealed without reason. The Vranje twins were slipping into legend. And yet, there remained one last fragment, one last account that even silence could not bury. A story of the final time their voices were heard. A story of their last recorded words. No one agrees when the last sighting occurred. Some claim it was during the chaos of the First World War. Others insist it came years later, when the Balkans staggered beneath new borders and broken empires. But all accounts agree on one thing. The twins were together again. One witness, a soldier passing through Vranje in 1919, swore he saw them standing near the ruins of a burned farmhouse. Thin, pale, their faces hollow. They spoke rapidly in their strange tongue, pausing only to carve symbols into the soot-blackened stones. He turned away for a moment. When he looked back, they were gone. Another story came from a nun in southern Serbia, who claimed she had once cared for one of the boys. She swore that, years later, she heard his voice again, yet not alone. She heard two voices, echoing in perfect unison, whispering a prayer in that haunting tongue. The sound drifted through the convent halls like smoke, though no children lived there anymore. Her testimony was written down. Weeks later, the page was torn from the convent's records. The most chilling account came from a linguist who, against orders, had kept fragments of their speech. In the early 1920s, he played a phonograph recording he claimed captured their final words. The recording was faint, filled with static, but the voices were clear. Two boys speaking in unison, slow and deliberate. No one could translate the words, but listeners described the sound as a farewell, a closing, like the last verse of a song. At the end of the recording, there was silence. Then a single whisper, barely audible, before the wax cylinder cracked in half. The whisper, some said, was not in the unknown language at all. It was in Serbian, a single word. Together. No one knows what became of them. Some believe they wandered into the mountains, vanishing into the mists. Others claim they were taken by the church and buried in secret graves. A few insist they never existed at all, that the story was folklore, a myth born of fear and superstition. But the villagers of Vranje still tell their tale in hushed tones. They say the twins were not cursed nor blessed. They were chosen mouthpieces of something older than Serbia, older than Europe, older than language itself. The records may have vanished. The files may have been burned. But the story survives, passed from voice to voice, from silence to silence. Two brothers, a language no one taught them, a bond no one could break, and a final whisper that still haunts the hills of Vranje. Together,